Jana.
And I'm Carol.
And this is the Real Talk Recreation Therapy Podcast.
On this podcast, we talk about real experiences and real research that back up the use of recreation therapy as a method of treatment for a variety of populations.
We try to keep it real as we address concerns and successes that we and other recreation therapists have had as we all navigate this awesome career field.
We don't have it all figured out, but one thing we know for sure is everything gets a lot easier when you can talk it out with a friend. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Real Talk Recreation Therapy Podcast. I am so excited today to introduce you to one of my early mentors in RT, Janell Greenwood. She was my professor in recreation therapy at BYU Idaho, and I learned so much from her, and I'm so excited to talk to her today about one of the most common things that we hear on this podcast and from listeners, one of the most common concerns in RT. So Janell, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to read a quick bio and then we'll jump in.
Okay.
Janell Greenwood has been in the field of recreation therapy for over 20 years. She has served in several capacities, including practitioner, educator, and administrator. She now teaches at Brigham Young University-Idaho. She has served as an associate dean and is currently the department chair over human performance and recreation. Janell has or is now serving on a national, state, and local level to promote the field of recreation therapy. In addition, Janell owns several small businesses. She has professionally developed talent ranging from college graduates starting a career to executive level leadership in Fortune 500 companies. Janell holds a master's in business administration, believes strongly in and maintains certification as a recreation therapist. When Janell is not working, she is gardening or playing in the outdoors with her husband and their 3 daughters and 1 son. That is quite the bio, and I'm so excited to talk to you about this because I know it's just something that you're so passionate about, teaching RTs how to market themselves, their programs, and how to put the right message forward. But do you want to just kind of talk about your experience in RT up to this point and why this is an important topic to you?
Yeah. So it kind of became important just because it related to my livelihood. When I first started, I'll first just admit this. When I took the class that was the administration class where you learned about some of the marketing aspects and administrative aspects, I remember thinking as a student that would never apply to me, that there would be somebody else who would do the marketing. And so I kind of tuned out of that class with the attitude of, well, this isn't something I'm going to be doing. I'm just going to be working with clients. I really don't need to know this stuff. And when I went and I did my internship, the project that my internship supervisor gave me was to develop a marketing plan and to market our program outside of our facility and to bring in outside groups. And I remember thinking, oh man, I wish I would have listened more in that class. and I had kept a lot of notes from the class and a lot of handouts. And so thus began this process of putting together a marketing plan and developing this strategy for this agency for my internship. And then I got hired to my first job, and I was hired straight out as a director. I was a director over a camp. It was a full-time, year-round job. But one of my main projects that I was going to be launching right away was going to be this camp. And I'd been working for the agency for maybe a month, and my boss was like, hey, our executive director wants to meet with you, and she's really excited that you're here, and we're going to go to lunch. And so we went to lunch, and the executive director, really neat lady, just awesome, but very just straight and to the point. And she got right down to business during this meeting. And she said, Janell, you need to tell us how you're going to bring in enough money to justify your position and to pay for your position in this next year. And I remember just thinking, wait, didn't you already have that kind of decided when you created the position? And,
Yeah, right.
when you offered this position to me, didn't you already have that kind of in your sights? Why would you suddenly be like, oh, and by the way, but I understand it was a nonprofit, and, money in a nonprofit is hard. And so I thought, okay, well, she's right. Like I've got to be able to show, you know, how I'm going to help them make money enough to help justify my position and to make sure that we're a viable program. And so I was put in charge of marketing. And so I started to have to market there too. And it just kind of snowballed from there. Just about every position that I went into after that was, okay, we need you to market these programs and we need you to do these things. And I just started to realize, oftentimes in our field, my attitude as a student was classic. It's a classic attitude that most people have. Somebody else is going to do that. They have people hired to do that. And the reality is that in our field, that's just not really the case. Oftentimes you don't have people who are just going to be able to just put together a marketing campaign for you. It's going to be the rec therapist who really has to do that. And if you're lucky enough to have an agency that has an arm for marketing and can do the marketing, you still have to communicate with them and you still have to help them know what you need marketed. And so that it kind of became this passion for me as time went on, was just how important it was to have the marketing skills and how important it was that we do market what we do without just kind of assuming that people know what we do, and also not just assuming that people know that we're doing it. And so, we're in charge of our story. And if we let people tell the story and it's not true, then we're doing an injustice to our own profession.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And I love how you shared the beginning of your story like that, because I think that is how a lot of us feel, that we think like, API process, like working with the clients, like all of the things that we got into this field for, not thinking about all of the things that have to happen to make that actually a reality for ourselves and our clients. And
Yeah.
it's hard to kind of shift that mindset when you want to be people and realize that in order to be people, you have to at least consider what this will look like to those people and to your supervisors and coworkers. Yeah, it's the most common thing that we hear is, I'm not taken seriously. Either by like coworkers don't take me seriously, they don't want me in the treatment team meetings, or my supervisor doesn't know what I do, or doesn't, or supervisor meaning like, higher and higher supervisors, or even clients like not wanting to come to treatment because they think you're just playing games with me. And it's such a common thing. Why do you think that is so common that we hear that as recreation therapists?
That's a really good question. I think some of it is, we are the one at the table who has the bachelor's degree and everybody else has that master's and doctorate. But the other part too is that I think that sometimes how do I say this? I think sometimes we set ourselves up for that. And that sounds really harsh, but I'll give you an example. So I present on this often in different conferences. I presented about marketing because it is something I'm passionate about. And I had a group of rec therapists come up to me after the presentation and they just said, "Oh, we wish we would have heard you before." And they proceeded to tell me their story of their agency. And they had a really strong recreation therapy program. And they were known though as the fun gals. Like everybody knew them as they just made fun. They had so much fun and everything that they did was so much fun. And this agency went through some major shakeups and they came to the rec therapy team and said, "We're going to dissolve your program. But you're so good at what you do that rather than do rec therapy, we're going to have you guys now do all the programming for all of our clients who come home after school." It was an at-risk youth facility. And so when the students were at school, when they would come home, the rec therapists were then made responsible for all of the recreation activities after school. So their shift essentially went from like an 8 to 4, where they were programming during the day and helping with therapeutic groups and that kind of thing, to it was, I think, 3 until 11 at night. And they were in charge of all the recreation programming. And they had marketed themselves so well as the fun gurus that rather than be seen as the rec therapist, and a part of the rec therapy team, they became the rec programmers because they were so fun. And so, we talked about it after that presentation, and they just said we would do so many things differently. We would call ourselves the recreation therapists. We would tell them about what we do. We would tell them the outcomes of our program. And we want to have fun, and fun is important, and that's part of what we do. But I always tell my students that your interview starts the day that you meet the person. It doesn't start the day that you go and interview. It starts with the phone call where you introduce yourself, or the moment where you meet them for the first time. And marketing is really similar. When we as rec therapists walk into the room and we're like, hey, the fun squad just walked in, we're marketing that, as opposed to when we walk into a room and we say, hey, we worked on this outcome with this client and this is what we found, then we become therapists, right? And so a lot of it comes down to how your program, what story you tell, and also what story you tell professionally, right? And so that's just something that we always have to keep in mind, is that unfortunately we're also kind of, I think, held to somewhat of a higher standard, because it's like, oh, well, what do they do? And so at the moment that we do slip and we're like, oh, we had so much fun at this, then it becomes, oh, they're the fun squad, right? And we do want to have fun, but it's really important that we really tell people what we do. I had a nurse who came to me and talked with me about an experience that she had sitting on a treatment team. And I just wanted to applaud these rec therapists. Like, I was so excited after she told me this story, because this nurse did not understand what rec therapists did. And she was sitting in on a treatment team, and it was a discussion about a patient. And this patient was having a lot of behaviors, a lot of outbursts, and just a little bit unstable. It was a mental health, behavioral health population. And anyway, so this treatment team was talking about, well, how do we help this patient? And, do we need to up his meds? Do we need to basically induce somewhat of a more docile state chemically? And the rec therapist was like, you know what, hey, let me work with him and let me introduce some of these types of activities so that we can work on some of his dopamine and also some of his serotonin. And that'll induce the same effect that we're working on with the medication without having to increase medication. Well, this rec therapist understood the language of her treatment team. And so when that rec therapist volunteered that, everybody was like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's introduce some one-on-ones and see if we can work with him on that from that side of things using recreation therapy. And I just applauded that rec therapist, because she was marketing her program with outcomes and telling people what she did, not just that they were going to go on a walk and have fun, quote unquote, but that she was actually going to induce certain chemicals, for bringing, stabilizing his mood. And that type of internal marketing is awesome.
Yeah, I think that is something that, as I've worked professionally, I've realized is way more important than I ever realized. Like, hearing your stories about these two polarizing stories, right? The fun guys, and like over here talking about how this is going to have a medical outcome. It's so interesting because I think too, something I realized is that, like you said, like people don't know what we do unless we tell them. Whereas like a physical therapist, many people know what physical therapy is, occupational therapy, at least in the positions I've worked, people already knew what to expect from those. From the recreation therapy team, they weren't sure. And so it was a constant battle. It felt like a battle to me, that to try to emphasize like our treatment ability, and emphasize like when we're asking for funding or we're asking for these things, it's not because we're trying to give them a break or trying to have, because we're supposed to have fun programs. It's because this is adding to the treatment. And luckily in my team, it was a lot of collaboration with the OTs and the PTs, talking about the outcomes and talking about how we could contribute to those through recreation therapy. But it's kind of hard to find yourself at that table and realize that everybody else has this common lingo that they're using or expects like this kind of level, and to think to yourself, okay, what do I know and what do I need to know so that
Mhm.
we can communicate effectively so that they walk away with the correct message. It's really fascinating to hear all of this.
Yeah. And, I've had a few students who have come back to me over the years, and it's been really fun to see them work to change, some of that perception, that they'll start out, they'll work in an area, pretty soon they're made a director, and pretty soon they're saying, okay, we're no longer going to be called the activities department. We're going to be called the recreation therapy department. And our job titles are going to switch from activity director to recreation therapist. And so it took them time to be able to create that kind of change within their agency, but they did, and they worked to change that story from being the person who just goes and does the activity to the person who's coming in and having is a part of the treatment team and is a part of that story for that patient as far as their outcomes goes.
Yeah, and it's hard to want to engage in the long game and wait and the time when it doesn't feel like it's working. Like I've talked to so many recreation therapists that just feel again and again just like so beaten down by like being told like, hey, why don't you take these people and do activities while we do treatment team, or why don't you like it's so it's really a daily struggle that for some reason we feel like it shouldn't be. Like we feel like it should be easier than that. Like at least with the people that I've talked to, like we feel like I've explained it, right? I feel like I've explained it. I feel like people should know, and it's hard to see it from their perspective and realize that telling them that one time maybe they still don't understand like what we're talking about. They still don't believe.
Yeah, and this is actually I talk about this a lot with marketing. So marketing, it's not a one-time game. I had a student who came to me one time, and he was in charge of marketing for our society, and he was really upset because he had gotten like 6 people out to an event that they had planned. And so I was like, well, tell me what you did to market. What did you do to let people know about this event? And he's like, well, we posted it on Instagram. And I was like, okay, what else did you do? Well, that was enough. Like we got it on Instagram. And I was like, no, the research shows that people have to have 6 exposures to even try something. And so in marketing, and I think as I was thinking about like what message I would want to send out to people when it comes to marketing is have a marketing plan, and it's a long-term plan, and it's a constant, consistent plan. It never stops, because you just don't have you can't afford to stop marketing. Consistently have to send a message, and consistently be branding, and consistently be making an effort to fight against some of the stereotypes that are out there, right? And so the research shows that a person needs to be exposed to something at least 6 times before they actually try it, as far as a product goes. So if you think of that in terms of recreation therapy, if we have this conversation, a one-time conversation with our boss that says, well, I'm a rec therapist and this is what I do, it's a one-time conversation, right? But if we persistently say, okay, we'd like to be involved in treatment team because we're involved in outcomes. If we persistently send a message, let's say that we decide that, I don't know, on a monthly basis, we send a newsletter out to our higher ups that say, here are some of the things that we've done this month. Here are the outcomes we've worked on. And here's a profile of one of our patients and some of the progress we saw. Now we consistently have a message that we're controlling, and we're telling our own story, right? Instead of them kind of making up the story of what we do, we're doing it. We're controlling the narrative. And so if there's anything that I would like have listeners know, is that they need to have a marketing plan in place, and they need to know who their target audience is. Oftentimes, we think of marketing. In fact, I've had people say this to me, well, I don't really need to market because we already have patients, and we just, maybe it's a long-term care facility, and so they already have patients there. No, but you need to market, and you're marketing internally, maybe not externally, right? Like, and so your internal marketing is just as important as your external marketing. And internal marketing might mean that you're building relationships with your OTs and PTs. You're also sending a message to your directors of what you do, so that they have a better understanding of what your outcomes are as a rec therapist and what your purpose is. But that internal plan, that internal component of a marketing plan is just as important, if not more important, than the external for some settings.
Yeah, that's that. And when you say that, what I'm thinking of is like assisted living facilities. The facility I worked at, like clients were, required by the military to be there. And so marketing like seems like such a foreign thing. Like it seems like obviously I would need to market if I was working a city program, right? Or or an outside program. But hearing you talk about that, it makes so much sense that that's important too. But I know that people listening, if they're anything like me or other recreation therapists I've talked to, just hearing the word marketing just kind of like,
It's so intimidating.
it's so intimidating. It's just, it doesn't feel like when you say, oh yeah, you need a marketing plan, it just feels like, oh, I don't know how to do that. Like, what do I do? So what are some marketing basics that you think every RT should know and understand, or what, or how an kind of a basic marketing plan that can kind of break it down? Because when I know I've heard you talk about this before as a student and at recreation therapy conferences, and when you explain it, it doesn't feel so scary. So you kind of break that down for us.
Do you know, the best way that I have found to break it down for rec therapists is use the PR process. Assess your situation. And if you've heard of a SWOT analysis, that is in marketing terms and in business terms, one of the analysis that's used a lot. And it stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so you do your assessment on what some of the strengths, some of the weaknesses of your program are, and then what some of the opportunities are in your community, and what some of the threats are, to your program. And so one is internal, the strengths and weaknesses, and then the other one is external. You can Google this and find it just about anywhere. But I think the easiest thing to do to really simplify it is to follow that API process. Assess your situation, assess who your target population is, assess who your stakeholders are, who are a part of the program, and then make a plan and set goals and have objectives. I know for me, in marketing, sometimes it's as simple as something to the effect of we'll increase our presence with our administration. And it might be, some of the objectives might be that once a month an email is sent to them giving them an update, or that a birthday card is sent that we remember their birthday, or it might be that we invite them to participate in one of our activities or observe one of our activities or our interventions every quarter. And so just having those kind of objectives means it's on the radar and that you're working toward it. And so in that plan, it's really important to have some goals and objectives. And you might look at it from a year to a 5-year standpoint. What do we want to see in 5 years? And what do we have to do on a yearly basis to make that happen? And then you break it down. And then the other thing that I use in a marketing plan is I usually will create what's called a timeline. And it's just a calendar. It's just a quick cheat sheet that I can look at and be like, okay, it's January. I've got to make sure I do these things. In February, I've got to make sure I've got these things done. But you have to be intentional with a marketing plan. If you just write a marketing plan and put it into a drawer or put it into a file on your computer, you're never going to actually do it. And that's the thing about a marketing plan, is that it's got to be visually in front of you. So you need to have it hung up on your wall next to your workstation, or else on your screen, of your computer, so that you're consistently being reminded, because you can't afford not to market. You really just have to make it a priority. And it doesn't have to be, what I'm talking about here is not big stuff, right? I'm not saying go and print a bunch of posters. I'm not saying to you, make a commercial. I'm not saying any of those things. Sometimes it's the little things with marketing, especially internally, that make a bigger difference than those bigger things. In fact, we used to do mailers for one of the rec centers that I directed, and you had 3 seconds, if that, for somebody to actually look at a postcard that you sent. 3 seconds, that was it. And the effectiveness of those postcards was minimal compared to what a phone call would be, right? Different marketing tool for a different purpose, but that's just to demonstrate that when you're looking at building a marketing plan and creating these ideas on how you're going to actually market, it doesn't have to be big stuff. It can be little, and it can make just as big of a difference, if not more. And so we go with our assessment, then we make our plan, and then we implement it, right? And then consistently throughout it, we document what's working, what's not working. We adjust. Maybe our message isn't right on. Maybe we need to change the message just a little bit. Maybe we're finding that we're getting really strong responses, from our administration by coming in and watching some of those interventions. And so we say, okay, do we want to broaden this? Do we want to, invite the director of nursing to come and watch that? Do we want to invite our case worker, our director over the director over our case workers to come and help and watch this? And so we want to choose the players and understand who we're choosing as far as that target population, and then we evaluate. And so it's just to simplify it. If I were to hand you a marketing plan, there's all these other terms on it, but really the simplest way I found to explain it is just do the TR process. We're trained in this. We know how to do this. And this is one of the reasons why rec therapists become administrators pretty quickly, is because the TR process trains us in a thought process where we assess things and we think things through, and then we can create a plan and implement it. We're trained in this. We can do marketing much easier than we think we can. We just need to know the tools, which is what I think sometimes we get intimidated about. But we know how to put together a plan. We do it on a weekly basis.
Yeah, this is so helpful to think of it in this way, because that SWOT is just another assessment. And instead of assessing clients for those outcomes, we're assessing like the marketing tools. So like maybe clients is if we're marketing to our clients, or maybe our supervisors, or maybe our coworkers. And I feel like there's a little bit of relief to just embrace the fact that we're going to do it, instead of just feeling like, wait, why isn't this, like, why can't this get better? Like, why is this so hard? Like, why do they consistently put me in this box that I don't want to be in? And it feels kind of like a relief to just look at it for what it is and say, this is how I am not being perceived, or my program's not being perceived as I wish it would be. And so I'm going to make a plan. And just understanding these marketing basics, like understanding that it takes 6 exposures, understanding like small and simple things may be more helpful than just the one time, like sitting down and saying what you do. Kind of embracing this idea that change takes time, just like it does with our clients. It's going to take time with our marketing plan, internally and externally, and just kind of just realize, like, take a deep breath, realize that you know how to do this, you can do this, and then decide to set aside just a tiny bit of time to actually be able to do it. To me, it feels like more of a relief than fighting against it continually and saying, oh, like just being frustrated, it makes me feel better to think I have a plan and maybe I can, work towards these outcomes.
Well, and Jenna, the thing is that, like, really we're marketing every day. We're already doing it, but is it the message you want to send? Right. And so no matter what, we're marketing, but creating marketing plan essentially creates this accountability and this awareness of what message we're sending. I'll tell you an experience that I had, and it was early in my career, and it was actually really jarring in some ways, but it was an interview, and I was interviewing for this job, and I really wanted this job. And I was excited about it. And I was in this interview, I was interviewing with the human resources director, and I was one of the top finalists or candidates in this process. And the interviewer looked at me and she said, so are you going to be like those other recreation people and come to work really unprofessionally dressed and, holes in your pants and wearing sandals and stuff? Like, what is it about you guys and you doing that? Here I am sitting in a suit and a pair of heels, and I was really taken off guard when she asked me that question, because that right there, now having worked at several facilities and been, responsible for the marketing plan for the programs, that right there told me exactly what the administration thought of the facility or of the program that I was applying for, right? And that I was going to become a part of. And right away, I was like, okay, clearly there's some problems in our branding, as far as recreation therapy goes. And we've got some repair work that we're going to have to do to build a relationship, in this agency. And that might have been a big assumption for somebody who's just sitting in an interview, but to have an interviewer be that straightforward about their impression sends a pretty big message. And so, I've always been really conscious of this. I do have an MBA. And so I have worked in, within business, and I have worked with people who have business degrees and who have gone, to some of the upper level Harvard and Yale and that kind of thing. And one thing that I always tell students is, just because your professional attire is justified, maybe a pair of jeans and a t-shirt and a pair of chacos because you're going out with a group of people into the outdoors, right? Which actually, anyway, I won't go down that road. But if I'm going to go to a meeting and I know that my higher up, my CEO is a Harvard grad, do I really want to show up to that meeting in my chacos, right? And I love my chacos. I'm not dissing on chacos at all. But when in Rome, do as the Romans, right? And so I think one of the things when we look at recreation therapy, we're already telling our story. All right. So marketing helps us control what the story and the narrative is. And so if I'm going to have meetings with people who are my higher ups, out of respect, I'm going to show up dressed professionally. And I'm going to encourage my employees to be dressed professionally. We're going to have, maybe a polo shirt and a pair of slacks. And that's going to be the dress and grooming that we say, is professional. And then if we are taking them outdoors, we're going to dress, appropriate to the outdoors. But oftentimes we kind of justify this, well, I'm a rec therapist, and so therefore I can show up this way. And yet that's the story we're telling right there. And it's a story that we're telling to people who don't necessarily understand our story, right? And so they look at it and go, oh, wow, you're really unprofessional. No, we're not, but we're dressed unprofessionally in their mind, right? And so can we be more professional, and can we make sure that we present a professional brand, to our supervisors? Yeah. Those are parts of our story that we can control.
And I think realizing how important that is helps to decide that it's okay to bring multiple changes of clothes for a day of work if you're doing those things, because I know, like, at the program I worked at last, it was hard to decide to change back into the professional attire when we were working at our desks, because it was like, oh, we're going to go out in 2 hours again and we're going to do this again. And so it was hard to decide. But when you think about what message is this sending if someone walks in? Are we, are we always doing sports? No. And so do we always need to be dressed to do the sports? No. And realizing that is going to send a message that is countering the messages that we're trying to send is enough to decide, okay, it's going to be okay if I bring the change of clothes, if I take the time to change and, get dressed up for the hours that I do spend at the office, because I remember feeling like that was a tricky thing, like, to try and navigate, like, okay, am I really, like, oh, I forgot to bring, like, my professional, okay, I guess I'm in this all day, like, and it's hard to decide to do that unless you're thinking about it more intentionally, maybe, and realizing that it's not just oh, maybe I should, but this is going to help me in the long run get
again, it's just that question of what's the story that we're telling, and people remember what they see and feel much more than they remember what we tell them, right? And so we just have to really look at the narrative that we put together for our programs, and sometimes be brutally honest with ourselves, and that's hard. I first started with at the very beginning, where they came to me after the presentation and said, we wish we would have heard this, a year ago. I admired their humility to be able to say, we messed up. Like, we should have changed the story and we didn't. And, hopefully there are programs out there now who are listening who can say, okay, well, who can evaluate what's the story we want to send, and what's the story that we're sending now, and be really brutally honest, and ask some people who are not within your rec therapy area about what the perception is of your program, and get some good hard feedback. And people that you trust will give you honest feedback. I think that that's part of your assessment and that's part of the weakness area in that SWOT analysis, is finding out what the strengths and the weaknesses are of your program, and ask people about it. They'll tell you if you're willing to hear it, and they feel that you're willing to hear it, they'll tell you.
Yeah, and that will go a long way in your assessment, to not trying to read people's minds, but trying to actually get some concrete feedback. What do you think of this? And sometimes, like I've definitely had clients tell me, oh, this is a waste of time, like, this is just games. And so, like, sometimes they'll tell you what they think the message is that you're sending. And so, or the message that they've heard from other people, like, I understand that, it's not, you may be trying really, really hard to send the right message, but then, someone else still sees it as the fun program, and so you're still the fun program. Like it can definitely feel like a battle sometimes, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I know one program, they're terrific. They have made posters, but their posters are, they have their programs on them and what the outcomes are for the programs. And so, if they're having Talk Thursday and they play games on Talk Thursday, well, the whole purpose of that activity or the intervention on Thursdays is for conflict resolution. And so they have it right there. Conflict resolution, we'll work on emotional regulation, we'll work on these things. And so they're really overt about what the purpose of their interventions are. And so so people know. And I think that's a huge part too with our clients and then our coworkers, is that it's not just Talk Thursday. It's, here's the purpose.
Yeah. And so in programs where you're often working with groups of people, I'm thinking assisted living centers, or like, a program where you have like a calendar of events, maybe in a hospital, you have a calendar of events that you're leading each day. How would you, maybe different clients are working on different goals in that, but everyone's coming to this thing and maybe they're working conflict resolution. They just need to be part of the social group. How would you market that to the clients so that they feel like it's not a waste of time, or they feel like this is still for me? What do you have kind of some concrete suggestions on how maybe you could market that to people?
Yeah, so I think, well, there's two thoughts that come to my mind. First of all, what kind of relationship do you have with the clients? Like, have you taken the time and gone and talked with each of them in their rooms and found out what they want, like what their purpose is and what they're hoping to get out of it? I know my mom was actually, she got into a car accident and she became quadriplegic. And when she was in rehab, I spent a lot of time with her in rehab. And I really wanted her to attend the rec therapy activities because I knew it would be so good for her. She was so isolated and so lonely. And it was interesting to see her, because if the rec therapist came in and talked with her and got to know her, my mom was like, I'm there, I'm on it. But when my mom would see what the activity was without knowing the rec therapist or having any conversation, she was like, that's just childish, Janell. I'm not going to go to that. That's just, I mean, that's for fourth graders. Why would I attend something like that? And so the relationship was big, but also, talking with her and saying, well, Mom, when you go to this, you'll be able to meet several people and you'll be able to talk to them. And I know you're lonely right now. And this would be a way for you to meet people. And so she would go. And so I think there's a couple parts to this. What kind of relationship do you build individually with your clientele? 2, do you know what they want? Like, do you know what's their motivator? And then 3 is, what's their treatment goals, right? And what's the treatment team working on? And so how can I help in the treatment team, right? And so I think if we're looking at it from those standpoints, because people want to progress and people want to move forward on their goals. And so if they know in what way this is helping them with their goal, instead of just, hey, you're going to have a good time when you come to this, come and have fun with me. It's a very different thing to sit with someone and say, hey, I know one of your treatment goals is this, and we're going to work on this during that activity. Would you be willing to come? I think that changes things. And then also the personal relationship I think makes a big difference.
I think one of my favorite things that I did when I was working at the Soldier Recovery Unit is I started doing assessments with clients, even though it wasn't part of what our program was supposed to be, but it was important to me. And in doing those, I was able to talk to them. And so when I showed them the events and when I talked to them about the requirements of the program and what we were doing, it was easier to market, which I didn't think of it as marketing, right? I thought of it as like, I thought of it as doing the API process. I thought of it as like, how can I get your investment so that we can actually implement this for an outcome? But it was easier to talk to them and say, okay, this client is working on being comfortable in social situations, but doesn't want to be in a huge group of people. Well, you know what? Our gardening program is small. It's a good group of people. It's quiet. So if you come to that, it will be a good way to be around people, but not around too many people. And if you need to take a break, you can go. Like it's easier for you to work with what you need there. And it was kind of time consuming. Like if I was looking at my day, and what needed to get done and realizing this isn't this isn't an outcome that anyone's expecting me to do. This is just what I want to do. This is how I connect with the clients. It felt extra, and it
Mhm.
felt like it was like I was trying to squeeze it in. But if you're looking at, again, the long-term goals, like even though it didn't seem like this is one of, the things that you're required to get done today, it was one of those things that was going to make the future easier, because we had already discussed what the programs would look like. They could ask their questions like, what do you actually do there? Like, what is this? Like, what are you working on? And we could talk one-on-one. I know that that's not necessarily a reality for everybody to be able to
Yeah.
get a long time talking with them. But even, and like you were saying, just kind of trying to build that personal relationship with clients, even as you see them, and just let them know, or try to do the best you can to kind of get some sort of rapport going, some sort of assessment, some sort of plan implementation, so that you can actually give them the treatment that you're looking for, especially if you're working in a place that doesn't value that right now. And so it's
Yeah.
hard to, find that.
Well, and that might, giving you an example of what that would look like in a marketing plan, under the planning section, it would be the goal of something, maybe having 90% of clientele attend activities on a weekly basis, right? At least one activity. And then for your objective, it would be have a one-on-one with each patient at least one time, right? And so now with that one-on-one, your assessment that you talked about, you found out what their need is, right? And what their want and what their motivators are. And so that's what that would look like in breaking down from that goal to the objective. Is one of the things that you could do is do those one-on-ones, right? And then, that you would have some sort of connection, just some sort of interaction with each patient on the floor on a weekly basis. And that could just be making eye contact with them and saying, hello, how are you doing? Right. And so again, I think sometimes we overcomplicate it when we think about marketing. And a lot of what we're doing, we're doing it. We are actually marketing already. And now it's just the awareness of what sort of story we're telling, and then what's the outcomes that we really want from our efforts.
Yeah, it's so good. What about with our coworkers? What are some like concrete thing? I'm thinking people that work adjacent to us, maybe physical therapists, occupational therapists. Maybe we're not working like directly with them, and so it's more how they perceive us, and so how they're talking to us, to the clients when they're with them. So maybe they're not working directly with your program. Is probably, other recreation therapy practitioners you're working with, or assistants. Like, it's easier to help them get on board, like, hey, like, this is, but I'm thinking, coworkers that are working in adjacent areas to you that maybe don't know. Maybe if you're at assisted living facility, maybe it's the nursing staff or the cooks. Or how can we kind of market to them? What are some like concrete, simple things to kind of help them, so that when they're talking to clients and the clients tell them that they're lonely, they can say, oh, you know what, this recreation therapy program is going on, and that's how can we help?
Yeah. Well, okay. So the first thing I'm going to say is build a relationship. That's the big thing, is building relationships with the people around us. And I think sometimes we tend in our field to be a little bit defensive, a little bit almost confrontational, in that, okay, well, we already know you don't like our field, or we know you don't respect us. And I think that's a huge mistake. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I've got a brother-in-law who's a PT. He is so respectful of rec therapy. And he just, every time I talk to him, he's like, yeah, the things that you guys do, it's just amazing. And he's just a sweetheart when it comes to like how he sees rec therapists. And I prefer to see most PTs in that light. Like, I try to just, like, when I talk to other physical therapists, I'm like, Kurt, that's my brother-in-law's name. Like, that's, okay, this is how they see us. But and the reality is not all of them do, right? And half of them just don't even know what we do, right? But if we approach things in a defensive manner, then we've already given them this idea that, that we're inferior, or that we, have some sort of beef with them. And so I think that's one of the things that we just need to be really aware of, is approaching other allied health professions with respect, and just just acknowledging what they do and the amazement of what they do, but also acknowledging what we do and using appropriate language. I think medical terminology and speaking as a professional it can do so much for our profession. And so when I told the story about the nurse sitting on the treatment team and the rec therapist being able to utilize the same medical language and talk in terms of neurotransmitters and neurochemicals with the treatment team, that was huge. And she didn't realize that a rec therapist knew that information. As weird as that sounds, she didn't realize that. And so I think utilizing our medical terminology, utilizing professional language, being professional in the workplace, building a professional relationship with those people, that brings us to their forefront as far as thought process goes. And so when they do talk with a patient and they have this moment with them, and then they say, hey, have you talked to Jana about that? Jana's got a program, one of her groups does this, you're forefront in their mind, and they trust you that you'll take care of their patient, right? And so I think that's one of the big things too, is building that relationship of trust, building that relationship of trust as far as a professional goes, where they feel that they could refer them, on a professional basis, and that you'll take good care of their patient.
I love hearing that, because I think that in the experiences I've had, it's very true that I can look at my coworkers, and the ones that I had a positive relationship had a positive feeling towards recreation therapy. And maybe it was that they beforehand they had already had that, in their heads, that they already liked recreation therapy. But I think more likely it was our ongoing relationship, our ongoing discussions about the outcomes and things that made it easier for them to support it, in the same way that it was easier for me to support them. Like it was easy to trust that clients were, safe with those treatment team members. And I would talk highly of them too, and I would say, oh, you know what, go talk to Dr. Arnold about this. Like, she's very good. And so it is interesting that it just boils down to something so simple as build a positive relationship with these people. I think so much stigma comes from just not knowing, knowing people. And so it's assumptions like grow and grow and grow until we cannot see like the positive and why we're all working together in the first place, or why it all matters in the first place. But
yeah,
if we,
and
have those, it's good.
Well, and we know from the research that our brain is hardwired to finish the story, right? And so if the brain doesn't know the story, the brain wants to finish the story because it gets a dopamine response, right? And so we often kind of finish the story of, well, they don't respect us in our profession, or they don't know what we do, or they think we do something different than we do. And that's the story that we often finish. And again, just going back to this line that I've been saying over and over, we're responsible for our own story. And so we can't really claim the victim if we're allowing that story to be told, right? And so we as a profession and as a professional need to build those relationships so that way that we are telling our story, and they're not finishing the story in their mind, and we're not finishing the story in our mind of how they see us.
Yeah. And I think that this probably, I was going to ask you about supervisors, but I'm sure this is the same, right? Same vein when you're thinking about administrators, supervisors. Like, start by building the relationship, because when they know what you do, it's easier for them to want to put money towards your program, or want to continue your program, or want to continue it with the same branding that you have.
Yeah, and there's a little bit more to that. And it's interesting. John Maxwell, in his book, 360-Degree Leadership, he cites some research. So a manager is interrupted about every 6 minutes. So every 6 minutes, there's something that comes to them that's outside of what they were working on. And it's probably actually more now with email, the way it is, where if we have it up, or cell phones, okay? Because I think he wrote that maybe 2 decades ago. And so the research is probably a little dated. But the other thing that he cites in his research is that managers deal with just about 90% of negative. So just about everything that they do is putting out fires or having to solve problems. And so in your marketing plan, when you're looking at supervisors and managers, you want to be specific about positive. What are the positive things we're going to put into their email box? What are the positive stories they're going to hear? I don't hesitate. Like if we have somebody who has gotten a really great job or has done something really neat in the profession, I will send that up to my higher ups without hesitation. And the reason is because I know the statistic that they hear much more negative than they do positive. And so anytime I can change that story and give them positive, that's what I'm going to do. That's why a newsletter is not a bad idea. That's why having some sort of report, maybe on a quarterly to an annual basis that you submit to them that highlights some of the positives is a good idea, because again, they're inundated with the negative. And so when you think about, coworkers, we want them we want to tell them the story and we want to build the relationship, right? And with our supervisors and higher ups, we have to even be more intentional with the positive and letting them know about what we do in a positive way, because they are so inundated with negative.
Yeah, that is really powerful to think about. Just like the little good story. So at the last job I had, one of my first assignments was to write a monthly good news story. And it was like I could choose any topic, I could highlight any program. And at first it was, and I think there's 14 soldier recovery units spread across the country. And so the other people that were in the position we were all over the place, but we'd meet on conference calls like once a month. And it was consistently the thing that nobody wanted to do. Consistently the thing that our supervisor was like, hey, like, thank you for getting those in. We need you to get them in. And it was interesting because when I invested in it, it paid off for itself in so many different ways, right? Like I'd send it to my supervisor, which wasn't, the way our system worked, my supervisor wasn't at the site with me. And so sending it to him didn't mean that the people that worked in my building got it, but then we would send it to them and then they would send it to more people. And it just got so, like, I remember we started a new meditation program and I put in the research about it. I put in what we were doing. And then our battalion commander, the highest up person in our building, wanted to come and see what we were doing. And everyone called it nap time. Everyone called it like, the RTs are doing like their nap time, their daily nap time. But when you just like show them all of the incredible research that was involved with this particular meditation, it was so cool. And when we got the little epithets from the clients saying, oh yeah, when I do this, I'm not feeling pain, or I'm feeling relaxed, or I can sleep for the first time in months. And when you're getting these little epithets, even though it's not the sort of statistical results that as recreation therapists maybe we're looking for when we're doing our evaluations, it's still like the anecdotal evaluations made such a big difference to everybody in our chain of command and everybody like going on up. And it became something that was less of a frustrating thing that I had to do and less of a like, oh, this is just getting in the way of, doing what I want to do, and more of a, okay, what do we need? What do we need more of? Like, what do we need more support for? What do we need more? And being able to think of it in terms of this positive thing that we could do, that was a requirement in my position. And in the position I was in, maybe they didn't tell us, this is going to do so many good things for you. But as recreation therapists, we can evaluate, right? We can assess and evaluate and see the, positive connotations that are coming from that, and say, this is well worth my time to send a picture and a little story and just let them know. Because it was, one of my stories is like framed on the wall on the commander's room now, because it was such a big thing that like his higher ups wanted. And it was just a small thing that I did, but it became so much of the story that the administrators.
Well, and again, they deal with so many hard things. A supervisor and an administrator's job is not easy. They are dealing with budget cuts, they're dealing with HR issues, there's just all sorts of things that they're dealing with. And so when they get a feel-good story, or when they get an email that says, hey, we wanted to tell you about this program that we've established and the responses that we're getting that are great, that's a it's a nice moment for them, but also it's telling your story, right? And it begins to control that narrative. I'll tell you, that evaluation component is huge when you look at APIDE, and it's huge because of, if you can get those stories from people and begin to compile them, now you have kind of this arsenal of information, right? And it is qualitative. It is qualitative research. Qualitative research. And so while you quote unquote were just gathering these quotes, you are actually gathering data, right? I had a friend of mine during the 2008 crash. They cut all of the rec therapy positions for the weekends at this facility. It was a mental health facility. And they essentially said, we're no longer going to have any rec therapists work on the weekends. We're just going to have our floor staff run the rec therapy programs. You guys plan them, and then our staff will run them, because we aren't going to pay any rec therapists to work on the weekends. Well, she had been tracking behaviors, and she had been tracking what occurred on the floor on the weekends. Okay. Guess what happened? Behavior skyrocketed. And so she was able to present the before picture to the after picture, and she got funding back for those positions to have for the weekends. That was evaluation. And that evaluation tool helped market her program as one that's effective and that just couldn't be run, quote unquote, by the weekend staff, right? And so I think when we look at the evaluation tool, it is important that we really track the outcomes pretty consistently, because that's information that, again, if we look at the business model, that's what our administrators respond to as data. And so if we can present data that says, here's the impact this is making, positive or negative, then they listen to that because it's data.
That is really cool to think about, and reassuring if you're feeling like it's hard to gather that data, to realize that the qualitative data is helping with the marketing, is helping people know. I know we started to have, I had a file of all of these good news stories, and so I could regularly send old ones to people too. When new people came in, I could send, hey, here is some of the stuff we have done. And so it definitely became like a kind of an arsenal of, here's the therapeutic value of what we do. And it did not take very long. As much as we all complained about doing it, it really didn't take that long when we just sat down, got a few quotes, and wrote the requirement was to do a slideshow, like a 1-page on a slideshow thing. It was not, because you say the supervisor administrators, they don't have time to read a big long thing. And so the requirement was, have a picture, have a little thing, try and have a quote, that's it. And so it's very simple, but the positive effects of that, not just for the marketing, but for the actual programming, to be able to say, look at all of the things that we're doing for this program, are really good.
Yeah. Once you have that marketing plan in place, if you've set up a few goals, and don't overdo it, don't have 50 goals. I mean, you can have 5 things that you're working on, and the objectives that you need to do to hit that. I think once you have that in place, you're looking at maybe an hour to an hour and a half of effort a week, right? So which would you rather, an hour a week of effort, or 3 days of having to defend whether or not your program gets cut and your job is lost, right? I would much rather be on the proactive end of things than the reactive side of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And it feels much more doable when you can think of it in that way, and think of it because again, for most RTs, it's probably not something that is in their to-do list that people are looking for, right? That people aren't looking for, did you market today? But knowing that this is going to be beneficial to all of the things that you're trying to do in the long run is helpful. What is the single most important thing that you think that you should do if you're trying to have a really small, short marketing plan? Is there one single thing or a few single things that you think of, that just to keep it short and sweet for people?
Okay, so definitely a marketing plan, but to keep it simple, I wouldn't overdo it by any means. There's 2 things that come to mind. Know who your target audience is. Are we targeting our administrator? Are we targeting our treatment team? Are we targeting external sources? Do we need to, build relationships with support groups so that they're referring people to our program, those kind of things. So knowing our target market is, I think, huge. And then knowing the message we want to send. Because when we know the message we want to send, then we dress that way, we talk that way, our communication, aligns with that, whatever resources we're using to promote, any promotional material we're using is going to align with that. So I would say the two things is know your target and then know what message you're wanting to send.
That's great. Thank you. So if you're an RT that isn't, maybe you're not the head of your department, you don't really, or maybe you work for such a big organization, maybe a big hospital, maybe you don't feel like there is a lot of even communication between you and the next person that could add you to the treatment team meetings or things like that, and they don't feel like making those changes are really in their lane. Maybe you're the part-time staff or the weekend staff, or you're a full-time staff, but you're the newest member of the full-time staff. What are some, what would you say to that? What are some things that you can do to, I guess, to market the message that you want to send when maybe you don't get to control
No, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, when you're not in a position where you can create or implement change, right? It starts with you. So it starts with what's your professionalism like? What message are you sending out to other people around you and your supervisor as well, right? Like what kind of relationship have you built with your supervisor? So I would say that, remember when I said earlier that the interview starts, as soon as you meet the person, same thing. The marketing starts, even though you may not have much power in that marketing plan, you still choose the story that you tell. And so you can begin with you, showing up to work on time, being willing to be a team worker, but also start taking some of those things that we talked about, start bragging about some of the things that are happening, right? Send an email to your supervisor that says, hey, I just have to tell you about this experience that I had today in this intervention and what happened here. Feed them with the good, because what will sometimes happen is that when you start doing that, they start getting mindful of it and they're like, oh, I want to pass that on to so-and-so, or I want to pass that up, or gosh, what, it's been a long time since I heard a good story like that. I need to start hearing more of those. And so you can start with little things to start creating that message.
I really love that. And I think too, just when you were talking about that, I was thinking about, it can sometimes feel so overwhelming to be in that position and feel so, I can't change anything, I can't make any difference. I think writing those good news stories helped me reflect on the good too, and helped me reflect on the positive that I was doing, especially if it was in a position where I didn't feel like we were having a lot of support from administration for the programs. But being able to reflect on, no, this was actually, like, this went well, and being able to reflect on that for myself maybe can encourage people to keep going, write those stories for them and reflect on it yourself and realize that the small things that you're doing are going to make a difference. And it's hard to see sometimes. It's hard to feel like it's making a big difference when you're labeled the fun guys and you're just told to do activities. But if you can look and say, oh, I know that they're working on this, I know that this thing was happening, it can make a big difference for you too, like you can, it can help you just have because it is such a long game. And I think that is something that sometimes is the most frustrating thing for people about this marketing thing, and especially marketing internally, is that it feels like such a long game. It feels like
it is.
Like we're always doing it. We're never not doing it. And if you stop doing it for a second, then you're, 2 steps back. And so to just kind of reflect on, it's the little things you're doing are making more of a difference than you realize.
Yeah, I had a student who became director of a program after graduation, and she'd worked in the field for a while, and her program was very much seen in the way that you're talking, the activities, will you do this activity? Will you do this activity? And she started just using different language. Sure, I'll do an intervention. What's the outcome of the intervention that you're hoping for? And so she would educate even when she was asked to do something. Well, what intervention, yes, I'll run an intervention, for us. And as a rec therapist, the outcome I'm going to, work toward is this. And so she just changed the language, and then people began to change that language around her. Right. And so when she became the director of the program and asked for the change from being the activities department to the rec therapy department, it was a no-brainer. She had established herself so well, as a rec therapist, and then moving into the director role, she had established already that they do recreation therapy, and she had asked them to stop calling it activities. So she had established rapport and a relationship with them to be able to do that. But she had also started educating them long before. Yes, I'll do an intervention. The outcome's going to be this, so she spoke in that language and began to just teach them just on a continuous basis what she was doing.
And this is so good. Thank you so much. Because I love that the things that we're pulling from here are change your clothes, change your language, like things that I have complete control over how I dress. I have complete control over the language I use, even if the program is using different language, even if it's not standard, even if it's weird that I like change into more professional clothes, in between interventions. It's so helpful to know that those things can make a difference, that you can start there and that it can snowball into, send the email that you were going to send anyway, but just put a little more effort into making it sound intervention-y and less activity-y, and like making it sound more professional and talking about like the therapeutic benefits versus just saying, hey, we had a lot of fun today, or hey, it went well, like
what was the therapeutic value?
Yeah.
What value did you bring?
Yeah, I love that so much. Thank you so much. I feel like this is just so good. I feel like it's going to, I hope that listeners are feeling better about, where they're at with internal marketing, especially. I know we didn't even talk about, external marketing and stuff. So maybe we'll have to have you back another time, but thank you so much for sharing this, because this is time and time again, the questions, the hardest things that people are is, I don't feel like I'm taken seriously. I don't feel like, and so thank you so much for sharing some concrete things that we can do that are well within our wheelhouse to be able to do.
And Jana, people are more than welcome to reach out to me. I have some examples of different marketing plans and things like that I'm happy to share. I know that it can be really intimidating to even think about, but the big thing is just start with something. So.
Yes, I love that. Okay, so in our show notes, we'll put links to contact you, and we put some of those. I'll definitely put an informational thing about the SWOT thing that we talked about. So if you're listening to this and you want some of those resources, you can go over to realtalkrecreationtherapy.com and check out our show notes, and we'll have them for you there. Thank you guys so much. Thank you so much, Janelle. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Take care.
You too. Bye.
All right, everybody. As always, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Real Talk Recreation Therapy. If you're looking for some of the information that we talked about today, you can find it on our show notes at www.realtalkrecreationtherapy.com. And if you enjoyed this episode and some of the other episodes we put out, we would love to have you like, follow, subscribe, rate, and review our podcast on whatever podcast platform you listen to us on. Thank you so much for your support, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode. Bye!